Professor Peterson, let's begin with you. Why are you against the use of alternate pronouns?
I'm against the use of legislation to determine what words that myself and other people are required to utter.
But would you use alternate pronouns if a student asked you to?
I think I've made my position on that clear already.
Well, perhaps not to our audience at home who are just being introduced to this. Would you use alternate pronouns? And why not?
Because I don't believe that other people have the right to determine what language I use, especially when it's backed by punitive legislation. And when the words that are being required are the constructions, they're artificial constructions.
A lovely clean room, but if for my generation, you know, we're looking down the barrel of climate change, we can't afford a house, some people can't get work, university education's unaffordable. Like, there are these huge, massive problems in society and the political economy that are also going to, you know, screw us over in the big picture that the clean room isn't going to necessarily fix.
If you're going to fix complicated problems, you have to learn how to fix simple problems first.
What is your answer to young people for some of the really big problems facing humanity, like climate catastrophe, like economic crisis, like the precarious job market? They just don't talk all this much about individual responsibility. Most of us are never going to be able to.
I'm non-binary and transgender, and I know how it's felt to be on the U of T campus for the last month. And I also know from private communications with other affected people. In New Zealand, where I grew up, academics have a statutory role enshrined in the Education Act to be a critic and conscience of society. So I think that's an idea worth exporting to Canada. So I'd like to give Peterson about a B+ for his critic role recently, and an F for the conscience part. A student once said to me when I finally obtained tenure, "Now, Professor, now that you have obtained superpowers..."
No, I don't know what that means. What do you mean a real woman?
Well, I'm asking you, in your mind, it depends what you think a real woman is, but do you think a trans woman is a woman?
Those who are asking for this alternate use of alternate pronouns, they
because I think that women are capable, generally speaking, of having babies, and they have female genitalia, and they have an XX chromosome, and I think the biological markers are relevant.
Interested in people being able to have different choices and having equality of outcome.
Aha, so the overwhelming proportion of people who are in prisons are male. Now, do you want to equalize that, just out of curiosity?
What about never had a situation in the usage of English before that required legislation to produce a transformation in the manner in which people spoke. It's a very dangerous precedent. So it's one thing to tell people what they can't say. So, for example, we have legislation making it illegal to do such things as deny the Holocaust. It's a completely different thing to demand that people use certain words when they're formulating their own ideas. And it's also absurd. I mean, here's one thing that's happened that I don't believe the formulators of this legislation ever foresaw. So in New York City, for example, there are now 31 protected gender identities. And I see no reason whatsoever why each of those gender identities can't demand the use of their own pronoun. And that absurd things like that have been happening on the University of Michigan campus, for example.
I don't know. I think the Soviets were pretty similar.
No, with all due apologies, you do not know the first thing about what secular humanism is. You should read the secular humanism.
I'm very glad I put you on the spot.
Well, I'm very glad but you get my point. You get my point. It's like you're doing what you should do, which is digging a bit to see what the hell's going on. And that is what you should do. But you're exercising your freedom of speech to certainly risk offending me. And that's fine. I think more power to you as far as I'm concerned.
Except you haven't sat there and...
types of criticisms, including the one you just heard from Professor.
I'm just trying to work that out.
I'd like to encourage people struggling with this to be kind. As
you have got me.
Impulse. We call somebody what they want to be called in our society. For instance, I don't call somebody Julie if they prefer to be called Jordan. That's just basic human courtesy. Here's a great little tip for people who are despairing at the possibility of remembering all those pronouns. What I do is just program in the pronoun next to the person's name in my smartphone. So whenever I'm out and about and I've forgotten whether one of my trans friends uses Z or Zer or they or them or something else, I just look it up and it's really super easy. One thing I'd like you to really look at in regard to this controversy is to watch out for who's getting centered in a discussion. Political correctness is code that powerful people use when they're annoyed that they're actually not the center of attention in any given discussion. And Bill C-16 is actually not about cisgender people, it's about protections for transgender people. And that's not, it's not about Jordan Peterson. So, we should have people learning to listen more. We have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a very good reason. When things get political, I like to ask who benefits and who gets to decide the rules of the game. So, mostly with this Peterson controversy, which is
anyone could ever make. It means if I would have been in Stalin's position, I would have ushered in the damn utopia instead of the genocidal massacres, because I understand the doctrine of Marxism and everything about me is good. It's like, well, think again, sunshine.
I'm not suggesting in the least, and I've never suggested that there's no domain of social action. I'm suggesting that people who don't have their own houses in order should be very careful before they go about reorganizing the world, which happens in many ways.
I see a backlash against masculinity and a sense that there's something toxic.
But what is this idea of being why is society overly feminized?
Well, I didn't ever say that society was overly feminized. So if we're going to discuss
life where kindness in the immediate present is not the appropriate way to react at all. So, for example, when you discipline children, you often hurt their feelings in the short term so that they can learn to behave properly in the medium to long term so that their lives go well. And so this automatic assumption that the people on the social justice warrior side of the equation are motivated only by kindness when they're also clearly motivated by power is something I find completely untenable. And I don't think that Pete's solution to program my cell phone so that I can remember what names people need to be called is a reasonable solution at all. We're actually supposed to now use electronic devices to bolster our ability to speak freely in case we offend
Jordan?
someone.
Is it so difficult to remember a pronoun? You remember somebody's first name, you remember their telephone number. I mean, I think that it's
I don't
very,
remember
very
people's
true
first names
that
very easily, and I don't remember their telephone numbers very easily. And when I see a stranger, I call them by the pronoun that seems to be in accordance with their presented appearance. And
That's you
they
being
appear
lazy.
that
difference between saying that there's something you can't say and saying that there are things that you have to say. And I regard these made-up pronouns, all of them, as the neologisms of radical PC authoritarians. Do you understand that? And I'm not a fan of that sort of person. And the reason I'm not a fan of that sort of person is because I've done my homework. I've read everything I can get my hands on in the development of authoritarian political systems, and I know the literature inside out and backwards. And I am not going to be a mouthpiece for language that I detest. And that's that.
Let me patriarchy thing. I think you have no idea how pernicious and dangerous it is.
Well, no, I don't. I really don't. Go.
Throughout history.
We had a bank employee accuse you of trying to masquerade as yourself at a bank and then locking down your ATM card and credit card so that you can't use any money. Those are the sorts of problems that trans people face every day, being out of housing, being considered, considering suicide. These are really big problems.
My refusal to use pronouns because left-wing activists want me to use them has nothing to do with whether or not trans people are having difficulties in society. And I'd also like to point out that I've had many letters of support.
Isn't it?
I've had many letters of support from trans people.
Find something in your message.
Yeah.
I'm a young man. I'd like to be improved, please.
Yeah.
I want to stop being a pathetic weasel.
Yeah, that would be good. Clean up your room. I don't know how you can go out and protest the structure of the entire economic system if you can't keep your room organized.
What are the limits of that idea, though? Because you can have a lovely clean room, but if for my generation, we're looking down the barrel of climate change, we can't afford a house, some people can't get work, university education's unaffordable, like there are these huge, massive problems in society and the political economy that are also going to, screw us over in the big picture that the clean room isn't going to necessarily fix.
If you're going to fix complicated problems, you have to learn how to fix simple problems first.
What is your answer to young people? Some of the really big problems facing humanity, like the climate catastrophe, like economic crisis, like the precarious job market. Because I just don't. I can talk all this much about individual responsibility. Most of us are never going to be able to afford to have all of these assets. To have.
For example, I'm Asian. I would bristle if someone called me Oriental. That is an evolution of how we use words. How is this different, whether legislated or not? I understand. I understand legislatively, but if at the heart of it is to allow a student to study free of what they feel is discrimination, why not help that along?
I already made my case for why not help that along. I believe that this legislation is extraordinarily dangerous, and there's other elements of it too that we haven't even got to in our society yet, like the protection for gender expression. And I've looked at gender expression in the Ontario Human Rights Code, and as far as I can tell, gender expression is best summarized in a single word: fashion. No. Because it's the way that you present yourself in public with your clothing.
I think that women are capable, generally speaking, of having babies, and they have female genitalia, and they have an XX chromosome, and I think the biological markers are relevant.
Interested in people being able to have different choices and having equality of outcome.
Aha, so the overwhelming proportion of people who are in prisons are male. Now, do you want to equalize that, just out of curiosity? What about bricklayers? They're 99% male, and we've got about 3/4 of the population now in universities in the humanities and social sciences are female.
Yeah.
Are we going to equalize that? And men work longer hours, they work more dangerous jobs, they're more likely to move, they're more likely to work outside, they're more likely to participate in jobs in the STEM fields that are scalable, they make more money for those reasons, and that's all hidden under the idea that the reason that men and women make different amounts of money is because of their gender.
Peterson, do you have any comments on the Nazi presence at your protest? The presence of Nazis and white supremacists.
But let me jump in, though. The university is essentially telling, at this point, it's human resources people to use alternate pronouns, in a way legislating their staff to do this.
No, wait, the legislation the legislation also requires it, and the university made clear their concordance with that assumption on my part by mentioning in the letter that asked me to silence myself that I'm required to act in accordance with the provisions of the Ontario Human Rights Act. And so the university knows full well that the legislation does precisely what I suggest it does. It's not written precisely in Bill C-16, it's written in the Ontario Human Rights Code. And if you read the Ontario Human Rights Commission policies on such things, you'll see very rapidly that utilization of preferred pronouns is part of the legislative package. So
and they're actually, if you read the legislation, Jordan, you will find out that they're actually called correct pronouns. There's no preference about this.
There is on the Ontario.
There is on the Ontario.
There is on the Ontario Human Rights Commission website. Where the
gotcha.
You have got me. You have got me. I'm trying to work that.
History. I've written the idea that women were oppressed throughout history is an appalling theory. They haven't had a great time, though, have they?
Who has had a great time in history?
But men have had less of a...
Really? Have they? Have they? By what standard? By what standard?
Well, I'm just saying if you're a woman...
How about war?
But it took longer for women to get the vote, and women belong to their husbands, and in this country, one woman dies every week from domestic violence, a man dies like once a month, I believe, in the same cause. Like, aren't there some clearly obvious things that women are victim of as a result of their gender?
There are inequalities in the catastrophes that the genders are subject to. And so, look, first of all, there's some things we got to get straight. History is a rough business. Everybody had it rough. In 1895, the typical Westerner lived on less than $1 a day, which is absolute poverty by today's standards. And so
these free speech laws were actually never intended to be used as all-purpose accountability shields, so that you don't have to be held accountable for your actions.
I'm perfectly willing to be held accountable for my actions, and the university has already indicated the seriousness with which they view my actions. And I also do not believe that free speech laws were there to protect to regulate violence. Free speech laws are there because we use free speech to identify problems in our society, generate solutions to the problems, and then reach a consensus. So freedom of speech is actually is protection for the mechanism by which our individuals and society properly orient themselves across time. It's not even a principle, it's the fundamental method by which our societies manage to maintain the stability that they do maintain.
Before they go about reorganizing the world, which happens in many ways.
I see a backlash against masculinity, in a sense that there's something toxic.
But what is this idea of being over? Why is society overly feminine?
Well, I didn't ever say that society was overly feminine. So if we're going to discuss my views, we should use my actual words.
Women got full legal rights.
They have the right to determine what language I use, especially when it's backed by punitive legislation. And when the words that are being required are the constructions, they're artificial constructions of people I regard as radical ideologues whose viewpoint I do not share.
That's pure narcissism at work, by the way.
A question for Professor
W. Heat, talking about what has become a very big controversy at the University of Toronto and beyond.